Meant for Me, episode 44. Represent Asian with
Irene.
Hey, Magical Misfits, it's Kate and Ivy and
Irene.
And I brought one of my magical unicorns in today because we can finally have friends and people.
Socialization.
We can leave the house and see
We're
other
not
people.
6 feet apart.
We're pre-recording this, so things could have changed. So if restrictions have changed, this was pre-recorded. This was not illegal at the time.
We are very safe.
We're being safe, I promise. So, segue. Brought Irene here so we can talk about, obviously, how we see representation as representation. So some of the stereotypes that we get to see, hear, listen to, watch.
Be labeled as.
Be
put in a group of. All that joyous conversation.
Yeah, all that light and fluffy as normal. So, everybody kind of knows that if you followed the podcast or listened to me talk for any length of time, I was adopted. I was adopted from the Philippines. I was born in Canada. But people kind of gave me the blank slate when I was born, and it was just like, oh, you're adopted, so you're Canadian. So, growing up, that's what you think. But that's not what the world says.
No.
As opposed to somebody who...
So for me, I was born here. So my mother was still an immigrant. My father came later also as an immigrant. But since I was born here, I was classified as a Canadian citizen. Mm-hmm. So all the same rights and everything pertaining to me, perfect. But the language and the system that I was put in through and my colleagues at the same age was put into, the treatment was different, the conversations was different. And that also is very different when you're a child, when you're 5.
Yeah, because you just go off of what your family does, because you don't have a broader knowledge of society. Funny thing is, both your mother and my mom, immigrants.
Yeah.
Except for my mom is a British immigrant. So when people look at her, they don't see an immigrant.
No.
And when she speaks, because English, nobody is going to say, oh, she sounds like an immigrant. Because when she came over to Canada in the 70s, she's like, the first thing I did was draw my accent. She's like, I do not want, she's like, nothing ever, everybody made fun of me. She's like, never. And I'm thinking, okay, that makes sense. But then you think about how you would apply that to your child. If you've suffered that, your kid might be suffering the same thing. And when people look at me and they go, wow, your English is great. And I'm like, that's the only language of God.
That's the only thing I've learned. Which is also funny because as the immigration process to Canada morphed more towards the 90s to the 2000s, they started teaching English to kids in the Philippines. So not only our regular heritage and culture, but on top of that, English, and English without our accent. So when I actually speak a lot of Filipino constantly, when I change back to English, there's a little bit of a trail of Filipino at the end of my tongue. Lots of people say it's a Spanish accent. I'm like, no, I say it's a Filipino accent. I am right. That is fact.
That bothers me so much when everybody just says, oh, you're Filipino. That means you're Spanish.
No,
but
I am Filipino.
But also,
period.
My grandparents used to live in Spain, so my parents, we went on vacation to Spain.
Right.
And my parents were like, no, we're teaching you your culture. We're teaching you your heritage. And I'm like, that's Spain. They're like, yeah, but they own the Philippines. And I'm thinking in my head,
not quite.
Just because you own somebody doesn't mean your culture is all the same.
No.
You're still not going to identify with the people that you own. And I just feel like that's such a strange thing to say to somebody.
And I understand now as an adult, the colonization of the Philippines happened for 500 years. And the unification of the Philippines happened when we were like, okay, this is enough. We're done. Like, we're Filipino.
However, that's happened a lot in the past 500 years.
And then there's that. We do this a lot to reclaim who we are. We're like, wait a minute, guys. We are Filipino. That's it. End of cap.
My biggest problem when people are just like, no, but I just don't understand why the Philippines wouldn't be under Spanish. And you're just like, well, look at...
Where are we?
First of all, the name the Philippines means the Isle of Philip, which means the islands belonging to Philip. That means that a Filipina or a Filipino is a male or female who belongs to Philip.
Bingo.
So when you're calling somebody from the Philippines, Filipina or Filipino, you're just saying, hey, you from that island who's owned by that king who has been dead for about 600 years now. And if you called somebody if you went, oh, hey, person who came over from Europe, who took indigenous land and settled and grew family, like you wouldn't say that of a Canadian. So it's a very strange thing for me when people say...
Yeah, it's different, it's odd.
There's no F in the Filipino language.
There's no, and then like Tagalog, it's a whole separate word, but really like at the root of it, it's like we are our own culture that we've created and the biggest thing that my family always taught me is kapamilya. It means family. And so like wherever you are in the world, if you're Filipino, you're family. And that's always how I've treated it. And it's never like, okay, there's Spanish culture, they're family. No, we are Filipino. We deserve to be acknowledged and seen as that.
And not just in diaspora.
No, exactly.
Because a lot of people will see Filipinos or like all over the world because there's a lot of us outside the country.
There's a lot of us. You're everywhere.
Just how it goes. And they just see them and they're just like, oh, but you're in diaspora. And you're just like, no, I
false.
That's still my heritage, though. My mom is not in England.
Right.
She's still British.
That's correct.
Like I just think it's so strange for people.
It's and even immigrating here, my parents, one of the strangest things, they would always be like, we're Filipino-Canadian. Because before they were Canadian, they were Filipino first. And they acknowledged that. And they even said to me, like, you're a Filipino-Canadian. Because even if I'm born here, my heritage, I still acknowledge as that. I still have all Canadian rights, but I like being acknowledged that I'm a Filipino. I'm the same type of human as everyone else, but my culture is very strong for me.
That is so just awesome for me to think. Because I can't describe. I see how my family takes on traditions and like especially British traditions and all the things that were and Irish traditions that were very, very central in my parents' upbringing. And then growing up into that and then sharing that with me, but everybody looking at you like, but it's not yours.
Doesn't quite fit, yeah.
You're a guest in this, even though it's still my family. We're still doing all these traditions together. Why doesn't that apply to me?
Right.
You're like, oh, but because you're adopted. It's like, oh, okay. So what do I know about my culture?
Which is so counter. It's so counter to Filipino concepts and thinking, which is, I guess, the stereotype in that and of itself.
Right? Because then everything becomes a stereotype of a stereotype. And you're just like, oh, great.
Where did it go?
I remember the first Asian I ever saw in my life. But, listen, I remember the first Filipino I ever saw in my life.
Wow, that's crazy.
I was old enough to be conscious, and like I was probably 6, and she was new at our church, and she was an old woman.
Wow.
And so I'm just like, they're only old? Like
they're only old?
This is the only thing I knew about Filipinos. Is the only thing I'd seen was this woman, and she was old, and she had a comb over because she was balding, and she had the shiniest head that I've ever seen in my life.
Yep.
But I hadn't seen a Philippine man.
Other person.
Or young. I'd seen an old Filipino woman.
Yep.
And that's all I knew. And she was super, super light skinned. And I was a kid, so I'm dark. And I'm going, but I'm so confused. You look nothing like me.
And that hits on two stereotypes actually right there. Because one really big stereotype that kind of counters beauty standards is the skin. Everybody in the Philippines wants to be light and soft and elegant. But then you get here and everyone's like, bathe me in the sun. And you're like, so where do I fit? And then on the second side, it's Asians age differently. And then we go straight from like teenager to old woman with a short haircut and a Louis Vuitton purse. Everyone's seen that Joy Co.
And the giant glasses.
Like those are all necessary. I remember I bought a long sleeve, and it was a really comfy, like athletic long sleeve. And someone that I was with was just like, "Oh, you're just beelining into your Asian elderly."
That's the thing. Like, if you do anything that sort of alludes to something else, they're like, there you go, being stereotypical again. And you're just like, sorry?
I'm like, well, it's comfy. It's comfort.
But also, me as a child, I'm not trying to be rude, and I am staring. I've never seen a Filipino before. I've never seen a bald woman before. And I'm going, how is that me?
He's like, is that going to become me?
And then they're just like, I'm like, I see no similarities. So I keep I'm trying to figure it out. Because like, I'm just like looking at her at church on Sunday, not paying attention to anything. I'm just like,
I mean, when you're a kid, do you really pay attention?
I'm just like, no, I don't understand. I have to know what is going on. And then, so I start kind of paying attention to what around me is Filipino. Nothing.
Yeah.
World Vision commercials. That's it.
Which shows you the little poverty.
Then you get poverty porn.
The little poverty child.
But they at least looked like me, so I could be this old balding woman at church, or I could be
a poverty child.
And I saw nothing in between.
No.
I'm like, as far as I know, they're born poor and look like me, and then all of a sudden, they're ancient.
Yeah.
They don't have a career or family in between because I'd only seen orphans and I'd only seen this single woman.
And then on career and everything in between, it's like you really have not very many paths to take when they put you in this little stereotypical box. Because it's like when you're growing up too, it's, oh, you must be so smart. You must be so smart. And it's like, I actually wasn't that. I'm really good at memorizing. I will say that. I'm good at memorizing something, but then is it actual knowledge? No, it's just words in front of my face. That's literally, and so I don't say like, oh, I'm smart. And in school, I could memorize like hell. After the door, I am nothing.
But do you find that you're really good at memorizing because you've been put in a place for so long that everybody has all of these expectations of you that you're so scared to fail, you have to have the answer?
I feel like that's everyone that goes through any kind of parent immigration process. It's like your parent has come to this beautiful country and you have to make it worth their while. So there's a kind of a yes, internally I do. Also, yes, for my parents, I feel like I'm obligated to. Not that that's a bad thing. It's a result of immigration.
And I find that...
And then you have to be smart as an Asian, but that's what everybody thinks. Everyone Asian's smart.
See, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about representation. We have... The representation that we are presented with is so conflicting.
Very conflicting.
It's very cut and dry. You are the nerd in school. You are the anime, like, little
thing with the ponytails.
And, or you're a housekeeper.
Or a housekeeper, yes, who doesn't speak English.
No, so you always have to be, like, subservient. People just automatically expect... But there's so many interchangeable changing ones because you're just like, yes, well, you're a colored woman, first of all, so this is what you have to do. You've got immigration against you, so they've got this going
There's
on.
There's that whole box.
Even though we were born here.
But that's irrelevant.
That's completely irrelevant because we have to go back to the first one. We are a colored woman.
Yep.
Then we go into you're Asian. But then you go into well, you're not Asian.
Not quite Asian, because people see the Philippines, they're like, oh, Philippines isn't part of Asia. Then where are we? Please tell me how to define myself that fits your mouth.
My favorite when that happened once was somebody was looking at me and was like, what are you? First of all, that's my biggest trigger. Ask me what I am.
Human.
But then afterwards, I'm like, okay, my background is Filipino. And they're like, you don't look Filipino at all. And I'm going, okay, well, what would you say? They're like,
what works for you?
What? We're just going to go with what you prefer. And they're
me.
Like, you look like a mix between Hawaii and Japan.
Man, I get that too sometimes.
Where's the Philippines?
I don't know. Neither in those locations.
If you line up a North American map, though.
The Philippines is still in Asia.
Yes, but if you draw a line.
Oh, yes.
It goes Japan, Philippines, Hawaii.
Yeah.
And who's in the dead center of that?
Woohoo!
So if I was a mix, wouldn't that make me Filipino?
Wouldn't it? You'd think if we're halfway, it's like, okay, if we put two halves of the whole is...
Yeah. Same with they're like, but are you Asian? Are you South Asian? Are you Pacific Islander? Are you...
Yes. To simplify all the conversations right now. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Whatever's easiest. Mm-hmm. This is probably why, as a child, my identifier in the media was Pocahontas.
That was actually, we went downtown and I remember it was in my second year of university. I had long hair. I was very dark because I had lots of time in the sun, one of those rare occasions. And someone turns me around and goes, you look beautiful, Pocahontas. And I'm like, none of that felt right. None of that sat right. I wasn't in the mindset to really say much, but I just said thank you and walked very briskly away because in that moment
you get shocked.
You get really shocked.
Everybody always has an opinion on what you should say in those scenarios, but honestly, I'm usually...
And then you walk away.
Or I have to confirm with glances around making sure... Did anybody else?
Am I the one that heard that?
Oh no! Oh, that came out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it's also like a societal or a non-societal understanding. I should start with that because it's only now that people are starting to be like, oh, how should we ask this question?
Yeah.
But also, why do you need to know? Why does it impact you?
But
why does this bother you?
I think this is kind of funny because throughout our lives, growing up, this has been a reality.
This is a very constant conversation.
We are used to being talked to as if we are things and not people.
Like, where do you come from?
What are you?
What's your origin?
My favorite is when they don't even bother talking to you. They'll talk to the white person beside you.
Where's she from?
Where's she from? But like...
Where's she from?
Does she speak English?
That one's a killer. I don't like that one at all. Honestly. I've gone, or the fact that your English is so good for Filipino. And I'm like, damn, son, I grew up here. I hope so. I've gotten that so many times, especially more so in university when I actually moved away in university. Oh my gosh.
Things were kind of messed up growing up. And then I got college, and then you see how the world sees you. Then you figure out,
you're like, wow.
And you're just like...
Damn. That's all I said.
Because growing up, I lived in a small farming town, and we had migrant workers who came in. And I remember how everybody treated the migrant workers. Mm-hmm. The racial slurs, the way that they were avoided, the way that we were told never to go around them because they were dangerous.
They're just labor workers.
They're just laborers. Like, you don't interact with them. You don't look at them. You don't go around the grocery stores on Friday night. And I'm like, growing up, you don't even think about that.
No.
And then thinking back, and you're thinking, oh my, everybody treated them that way? Those are human beings. Those are people. And then because you're no longer that kid in that town, that animosity turns to you because you're the same color. Even though you'd grown up in this town. You knew everybody. We all went to school from...
And then
suddenly I'm the racial slur?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was shocked.
Yeah. Or it's like, you don't look quite Filipino. Why don't you do this as a Filipino? My favorite one is, you're Filipino, so you must know Maria in X. I'm like, well, Maria could be my cousin or my sister, but you can tell me if I know her or not.
No. My favorite is, oh my God, you're Filipino. My buddy's wife's Vietnamese. And you're just like...
And that pertains to me how?
What? Why are you telling me this? The one time I had a good response for it.
Oh,
one time somebody said that to me. I'm like, you're kidding. The guy I just walked past was white too.
Oh, you must know them.
And I was just like, what are the odds? And they just stared at me. And they were so uncomfortable and so offended.
Because really, you would never walk up to another person. Like, if someone was like, oh, my background's Irish. Oh, my goodness. I know so many Irish people. That is such an unheard of thing.
Or even, not even so many Irish people. I know an Irish person.
Yeah. Or do you know this person? Or another favorite one, do you eat lumpia? Or do you eat the noodles? Do you eat noodles for lunch?
Do you eat the noodles?
The noodles?
I've had the only culture
that eats noodles.
The entire planet that has... Or...
About a rice? That's another one.
Do you eat dogs?
Oh my gosh. Lunch, breakfast, dinner. No, we don't eat dogs.
Yes, that is why I have so many dogs in this house. No, please don't take that out of context. I was completely joking.
We don't eat animals or pet animals. It's a pet. It's a companion. We have dogs in the Philippines as companions.
Yeah.
It's a very similar concept.
People have pigs here as pets.
Yeah, that one's strange.
People have pet chickens. Like,
I understand the chickens. Definitely eat your eggs, kids.
Yes, but to just be like, well, do you eat a random animal? Like, just pick an animal and just be like, because we have it as a pet. It's just...
Yeah, that's just strange. Like...
But also, to have zero knowledge of another person's cuisine or culture and only seeing the one stereotype that is always brought up on, like, late night TV. And it's just like, okay, guys... Let's put a stop to that. Let's get some history going. The dog thing was...
Let's cut that out.
Let's cut that out.
We're done.
We're circling back to human zoos. We don't want to go there.
No, we don't need to go there. Yeah.
Because the thing with representation that people fail to remember is the amount of history that has just been PR campaigns.
Oh, yeah.
To get people to fall in line. When all you see is not your representation, you're othered, you're not human, you don't count.
No.
So
you're not the
what
same
place
bucket.
are you going to be in the world? Because the world is showing you, this is a roadmap to how to fit in this society. You have to fit in all of these boxes. And then we're going,
That wasn't my start, and that wasn't my end.
I got a little bit of that in there, but I kind of did a detour.
And then we're like along here over there. Yeah.
So there is no real, like, you can't be stereotypically this because there is no such thing as a stereotypical this.
Right. Exactly.
And that's the T.